Welcome to the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. Follow us on all social media accounts at Sports Angle on PR and follow PRConnectionsRadio.com on all social medias at PRConnectionsRadio. We have an amazing show planned for every single one of you tonight. As the MLB All-Star Game going to be this weekend. You had the Celebrity All-Star Game, which is fantastic, and Bad Bunny stole the show. The NBA Summer League, congratulations to the Portland Trail Blazers on beating the New York Knicks in the NBA Summer League Championship. The Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio was at the NBA Summer League this weekend. Had a fantastic time doing media out there. And I enjoyed being at the Thomas and Mack Center, watching the best up-and-coming players in the NBA today. The NFL, there's been some small news involving Deshaun Watson, but unlike my first segment I'm going to do on this show, I'm not going to talk about the same 5 topics that every other show has done. And then the NHL, the free agent signings, and all the trades that have happened. We're going to talk about that in the second hour of this show, break down the NHL situation. Now, before we get into our main topic tonight, Thomas, I appreciate your support, bruv. And your question is, Greg Popovich, Doc Rivers, Steve Spurrier, Eric Spoelstra. 2 have to go. Who you say? Well, Thomas, I appreciate your question here on the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com. And this is going to be controversial, but I'm going to explain why I'm going to say this. I say that Greg Popovich and I would say Doc Rivers have to go. Here's the reason why I'm going to say that in 2022, I'm going to take Pop off and I'm going to take Rivers off. For starters, Steve Kerr over the last 10 years has been the best coach in the NBA. Steve Kerr has helped the Golden State Warriors become a dynasty. Now, I know there's people like Mark Jackson who like to get some bit of the credit, but Steve Kerr still had to take the mantle and become a good coach. He still had to take the team and coach them to 4 NBA finals. So Steve Kerr's got to stay on there. And because of what he has done in Miami, Eric Spoelstra has been a solid coach. In fact, you can make an argument that Eric Spoelstra is a top 5 coach in the NBA today. From what he did in Miami during the Dwayne Wade era, from what he did during the Big 3 super team era, and what he did recently with Jimmy Butler, Eric Spoelstra has been able to adapt and survive in the modern NBA. Unfortunately, Doc Rivers is a playoff collapse machine. Doc Rivers has not been for a long time a top 5 coach in the NBA. Greg Popovich is past his due date. As much as Greg Popovich is going to get a lot of credit for what he did in San Antonio in the 90s and the 2000s, Greg Popovich hasn't won a title in 9 years. Greg Popovich hasn't made it to an NBA Finals in 9 years. As a matter of fact, Greg Popovich hasn't made it to a Western Conference Final in 7 years. So, Thomas, if you're talking about right now, 2022, I say Greg Popovich has to go and Doc Rivers has to go because of it's not about what you've done for me then, it's about what have you done for me today. So as we talked about the NBA for the first 5 minutes here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, the voice of new media. For all people watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications to watch every single episode of the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. Our main topic for tonight is a rant. My first topic tonight is something I've been wanting to say for a long time here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. There is a discussion that I have really been needing to get off of my chest about the national media. I need to have a conversation with all of the corporate bigwigs that run these major sports networks. Because I have a problem with the way national media is doing sports now. For the last 4 or 5 years, I have seen this shift, this evolution of going backwards in sports media. And because I have a live microphone and nobody can stop me, I am going to say what I've been wanting to say for years. And that is, hey, national media, there's more than just LeBron James in the NBA. Hey, national media, there's more than just the New York Yankees in MLB. NFL, there's more than just the Dallas Cowboys who haven't been relevant since the Bill Clinton administration. And for all my TSN people out there in Canada, yes, there's more than just Montreal and Toronto. It's not just 2 teams in the NHL. You don't need to talk about Montreal and Toronto for 90% of your show. I've really been wanting to discuss this because every time you turn on NBC, every time you turn on ESPN, every time you turn on Fox Sports, I swear they talk about the same 7 topics again and again and again. And I understand why they do it. I understand why these corporate bigwigs who get billions and billions of dollars in revenue, I get why you do it. Because it is the safe option. It is the calculated option. You will make more money talking about what LeBron James had for dinner last night than talking about the Atlanta Hawks and what Trae Young has done for the NBA. You will make more money talking about will the New York Yankees win a World Series title than talking about the fact that there is a team right now in the Seattle Mariners who have won 14 games in a row. By the way, why is no one talking about that? You go on all the big 4 networks, the major 4 sports networks, and it's been dead silent on the fact that Seattle Mariners have been the hottest team in MLB for the past 2 weeks. But yet, they want to talk about the New York Yankees and will they break the 116-game season record set by Seattle. My major complaint with national media is their lack of topics. It's the fact that they are so focused on one team. They're so focused on 2 topics for every single show that it becomes redundant, it becomes lazy, and in my opinion, it becomes lack of creativity. So as we're talking about my problem with the national media here in sports, on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, I just have that major problem with the fact that ESPN will have 5 shows and they'll talk about the same 4 topics on every single show. My problem is that you go on Fox Sports 1 and all they will do is rant and complain and beg and moan about the same 4 players every single show. It is lazy. It is not creative at all. And honestly, I feel like if you're a diehard sports fan, you're not going to listen to them anyway. In fact, for all people who are watching all around the world, please tell me, when is the last time you watched a show on the major 4 networks and you actually left it by saying, man, they made an excellent point on this show? When's the last time you watched a show with Stephen A. Smith and you actually had something that you took away from it that was actually interesting? Because I think the biggest problem that I have with Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharp is that they don't really say anything. You know, if they weren't yelling at the top of their lungs or if they weren't making funny faces towards the camera, you would realize that they aren't really saying anything. They're just talking. See, on this show, the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, I try to be different. That's the reason why I talk about different teams on this show. There's a reason why I go on about the NFL and the NHL, but I try to mention as many teams as I possibly can. Because I know that deep down, a lot of sports fans, a lot of diehard sports fans, feel the same way that your host Ian Rakelli does. The fact that in MLB, they don't talk about the Philadelphia Phillies. They don't talk about the New York Mets. They don't talk about any team that isn't the New York Yankees and the Los Angeles Dodgers. And if you are a casual sports fan, you'd be convinced that the New York and LA market are the only two that exist in sports. So to really wrap up on this segment to kick off this show, I really want to know from everyone watching around the world, do you agree with your host Ian Rakelli that the national media, the sports media that's on every single day, has become lazy and has become not creative when it comes to what they talk about? The fact that the national media gives you the same 5 talking points on every single show, and it's become a redundant ice cream shop with just a bunch of vanilla and not chocolate and caramel and cookies and cream. No, they give you the same vanilla topics every single show. So that's going to be my rant that is over now. Just wanted to kick off the show talking about that because I've been wanting to talk about national media and my distrust in the national media for a long time now. So the NFL is going to be coming pretty soon. The 2022 NFL season is going to be kicking off in a couple of weeks. And as much as I'm excited for it, and as much as I know you are excited for it, we need to discuss a sophomore campaign. We need to look back at the 2021 NFL draft because I'm going to give you not 1, not 2, not 3, but I'm going to give you 4 players that I believe are going to have a breakout season in 2022. I'm going to give you 4 players that I am confident in that are going to excel in 2022. The first player I have on there is the quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars, the number 1 overall pick from the 2022 NFL draft, and that is Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback from Clemson, the guy who is the most touted prospect since Andrew Luck, he did not have a great rookie campaign. Trevor Lawrence with the Jacksonville Jaguars, his statistics was 12 touchdowns to 17 interceptions, had a little under 3,700 passing yards, under 60% completion percentage, and he really did not succeed in year 1. I mean, he had a 3-14 record. Jacksonville had the first overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft. Now, I'm going to give you 2 main reasons as to why Trevor Lawrence will have a breakout campaign in 2022. First off, he's not going to be under Urban Meyer anymore. Understand that Trevor Lawrence is now going to have a head coach in Doug Peterson who knows how to coach at the NFL level. Having Urban Meyer be the head coach for Trevor Lawrence was an absolute disaster in 2021. Having Urban Meyer be a head coach halted the development of Trevor Lawrence. It set him back and not forward. So the fact that Doug Peterson is going to be the head coach in Jacksonville is going to benefit Trevor Lawrence completely. Doug Peterson has experience with guys like Carson Wentz. He has experience with Nick Foles. He has experience with young quarterbacks, and he's going to use that to help benefit Trevor Lawrence. And the second reason why I am confident in Trevor Lawrence is that he now has weapons at his disposal. Understand that last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars had one of the weakest passing games in the NFL. Understand that the Jacksonville Jaguars had absolutely nothing in terms of talent alongside Trevor Lawrence. Whereas now they're going to have that 1-2 punch of Travis Etienne and James Robinson. They're going to be able to use those two guys to benefit Trevor Lawrence. You also have a bunch of wide receivers like Marvin Jones, like Zay Jones. They signed Christian Kirk. They bring over Laquan Treadwell and Laviska Shenault. They have 4 or 5 options now for Trevor Lawrence. He's not just going to have to chuck the ball up and hope that somebody grabs it. No, Trevor Lawrence now has some weapons that are going to be able to help him long term. Now, the second player that I see breaking out in the 2022 NFL season is someone that I was really surprised didn't break out last year. This was a guy that I had a lot of high hopes on in his rookie campaign. Unfortunately, he really did not develop into the guy I believed he was going to be. However, I believe that his second year in the NFL is going to benefit him completely, and that is Jalen Waddle from the Miami Dolphins. Now, Jalen Waddle, the very fast wide receiver, came out of University of Alabama. He is going to be in Miami. And yes, I know Tua can only throw about 10 or 15 yards, but if you have the speed that Jalen Waddle does, if you have the hands that Jalen Waddle can have, I believe you can use that to your advantage. If you could do quick slants, if you could do go routes, if you could do stop and goes, I believe that Jalen Waddle can use that to his potential and have a 1,000-yard season in Miami. I believe that Jalen Waddle is going to be a wide receiver that's not only going to be a Pro Bowler this year, I also believe that with him having the NFL rookie record for receptions last year, he is going to be building and building and building off of that success, and he's going to have maybe around 1,500 receiving yards and maybe a dozen touchdowns for Miami. Because understand that Tyreek Hill, he's going to get all the media attention. Tyreek Hill is going to be the main attraction in Miami, where that's going to benefit Jalen Waddle because he's not going to have all the heat on him. He is not going to have the attention from these defensive coordinators. So while they're focusing on Tyreek Hill and they're going to stop Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle is going to reap the rewards, and he's going to get a massive boost in receptions, passing yards, and touchdowns in Miami. So we've talked about Trevor Lawrence and why I believe he'll have a breakout season in 2022. I just mentioned Jalen Waddle. Well, we're going to stay on the wide receiver train for a minute because we're going to go from Miami and we're going to get on our Boeing 747 and we're going to go all the way to Philadelphia because I believe that Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith will have a breakout season. Devontae Smith last year had a little under 900 receiving yards, had about 5 touchdowns, which was good, but it wasn't great. All right, it was solid, but it was not a great campaign. Whereas this year, I believe that Devontae Smith is going to do a very similar thing that Jalen Waddle is going to have in Philadelphia. Understand that when it comes to Devontae Smith, he's going to get some opportunities because A.J. Brown is now in Philadelphia. A.J. Brown is the number 1 wide receiver. Devontae Smith's going to be number 2. So because Devontae Smith is not going to have to be the primary option in Philadelphia, it's going to benefit Devontae Smith. He's going to be a guy who have maybe 10 touchdowns next year, maybe have about 1,400 receiving yards out there in Philadelphia. So Devontae Smith should have a solid year. I also believe that when it comes to Jalen Waddle, he'll have a successful year. And Trevor Lawrence, with his improved offense in Jacksonville, will have an amazing season. But we're going to end this off by going to the defense. We're going to wrap this up by discussing the defensive side of this situation. Because there is one player on defense from the Denver Broncos that is going to benefit from a sophomore campaign. I mean, this guy is the son of a former NFL cornerback. This is a guy who's pretty much carrying off the prestige of that last name. And more importantly, this is a guy who last year, I mean, he had 4 interceptions, 14 pass deflections, 58 tackles on the year, and he had a defensive touchdown as well. But he's going to keep getting better and better, despite the fact that the Denver Broncos might not be the best team in the AFC West. However, because of what Patrick Surtain can do, I believe that him being a starting cornerback in the NFL, he's going to benefit from playing in Denver. He's going to have to go up against Juju Smith-Schuster in Kansas City. He's going to have to go up against Keenan Allen in LA. He's going to have to go up against a guy like Devontae Adams in Las Vegas. Patrick Surtain is going to go up against the best of the best in the NFL. He's going to have to go up against somebody who is going to be the best. And when you are forced to take on the best, it elevates your game. When you take on the best receivers in the NFL, it's either going to make you better or it's going to make you exposed. I am banking on the better part. I believe that Patrick Surtain is going to do a solid job out there in Denver. So the 4 breakout players I have for the 2022 NFL season is Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence. I also believe that wide receiver Jalen Waddle from the Miami Dolphins, wide receiver Devontae Smith from the Philadelphia Eagles, and defensive back Patrick Surtain from the Denver Broncos. Those are going to be the 4 players that are going to break out in year 2 of the 2022 NFL season. And I would not be surprised if a guy like Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle even gets all-pro consideration because of how good their seasons are going to be. Think of them about Justin Jefferson and Deebo Samuel. I mean, Deebo Samuel and Justin Jefferson are 2 of the best young wide receivers in the NFL today. Justin Jefferson is the 2nd best wide receiver in the NFL, and Deebo Samuel has become a dual threat, a wildcat of sorts in the NFL. So continuing with the NFL conversation here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, the greatest running back of all time, the GOAT. Who is really the greatest running back to have ever done it? Who really is someone who you can say is the best of the best? Because on one hand, you have the modern guys, you have people who have been born in the 2000s, 2010s. They will tell you that a guy like LaDainian Tomlinson was the greatest of all time. When you have guys who grew up in the 90s, they'll tell you a guy like Barry Sanders was the greatest of all time. You go down to Chicago, and you'll have Walter Payton be mentioned on an absolute frequent basis. However, if you talk to people who were around in the 50s and 60s, if you talk to people who have watched highlight reels, they will tell you that Jim Brown is the greatest running back to have ever done it. So who really is it? Is it Walter Payton? Is it Barry Sanders? Or is it Jim Brown? Now, my angle is going to be, simply put, if you didn't have this guy, Barry Sanders and Walter Payton would not exist. If you did not have Jim Brown, you do not have LaDainian Tomlinson. If you do not have Jim Brown being the innovator at the running back position, you do not have LaDainian Tomlinson. You do not have an Emmitt Smith. Understand that Jim Brown, in his 8 years in the NFL, only 8 years in the NFL, had 12,000 rushing yards, 106 touchdowns, and 15,000 all-purpose yards. There's also the same Jim Brown that ended up having every single rushing record by the time he left the NFL. Understand that Jim Brown still to this day holds multiple records in the NFL. Understand that his averaging of 104 yards per game is the best in NFL history. Understand that this is a guy who was named to the 50th, 75th, and 100th anniversary team. This is also a guy who had his jersey retired by the Cleveland Browns almost immediately after retiring. So when it comes to Jim Brown and what he did in Cleveland, the fact that he helped them win an NFL championship, he also was a 3-time NFL MVP, which you really never see anymore. He was a 9-time All-Pro, which, by the way, that should really tell you all you need to know about Jim Brown. 9 years in the league, 9 All-Pro selections. 9 years in the league, 9-time Pro Bowler. Understand that he was the rushing leader in the NFL for 8 of his 9 years. Understand he was a scoring leader in the entire NFL in 1 year. So when it comes to Jim Brown, if you do not have the dominance of Jim Brown, you do not have the modern running back you have today. So my angle to you on who is the greatest running back of all time, it starts and it stops with Jim Brown. Because without Jim Brown, you do not have the running backs that came after him. Moving over to Las Vegas, Marquette King, the former Raiders punter. There was a recent article that came out where he alleged that John Gruden cut him due to hatred. He was talking on 95.7 The Game and said that he was in good standing with the Raiders until John Gruden came up. Until John Gruden joined the organization, he immediately was gunning for me. And I quote, "As soon as I showed up, Reggie was telling me that Gruden doesn't want me there," and end quote. Marquette King also mentioned, and quote, "We're about to let you go. We're going to put you on the wire, and it's going to hit the news soon," and end quote. Marquette King was a solid punter in the NFL, and this was a guy that, caught on with the Denver Broncos after he was released, but he had a career that ended after a couple seasons in the NFL. And this is a guy who has come out and accused John Gruden of intentionally cutting him because he didn't like him. And he also says that discrimination ended his tenure with the Las Vegas Raiders because John Gruden did not want him there. Now, for anybody who recalls the reason why John Gruden got fired, it was because of a lot of emails that came out that showed that he said a lot of certain things in emails with back and forth conversations. So, am I going to say that Marquette King is lying? No, I'm not. Am I going to say that John Gruden could have cut him due to discrimination? Look, anything is possible in the NFL. And when you understand what John Gruden was fired for and you understand why John Gruden was let go, no, it would not be a shocker to me that is the reason why Marquette King was indeed let go from the Las Vegas Raiders. So, I'm going to say to you and everyone watching around the world that this article that came out about Marquette King and why he got let go from the Las Vegas Raiders, I do see it as a possibility as to why John Gruden did let him go. And when it comes to Marquette King, I think that he has some basis in his conversation. And lastly, here on the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media, before we move on to the next topic, I want to briefly mention the undefeated season in the NFL. Because I have an angle for you that I say that there will never be another undefeated season in NFL history. My two main arguments for why it will never happen again is, A, there has been more games added to the NFL schedule since the last time an undefeated season occurred. Understand that the Miami Dolphins only had to play 17 games in total when they went undefeated in 1972. Now, you're going to have to play at minimum 20 games, at a maximum 21 games in order to be undefeated. Let's also recall that the last 3 teams that almost went undefeated, the 2007 Patriots, they went 18-1. You also got to remember the Chicago Bears went 18-1. And the Indianapolis Colts went 17-2. So back then, even when they nearly went undefeated, they had one less game than you would have now. So because of the odds and the probability of winning 20 games in a row, it is near impossible for an NFL team to do it. And the second reason why I say that an undefeated season is never going to happen again is because of the fact that the Miami Dolphins and the way that the schedule was set up back then, it wasn't like it is today. The playoff format is not a wild card, division, championship. It wasn't set up like it is today. So the Miami Dolphins didn't have to face as many people in the playoffs, and they didn't have to have as much wear and tear on their bodies than they do now. So I'm going to say that when it comes to the playoffs, I look at it and I say, you know what? I think that the undefeated season will not happen again because of the more games that have been added. The playoffs are more wear and tear on their bodies, and considering the fact that there's even bench days where late in the season, NFL teams will bench their starters to preserve them for the playoffs. Well, back then, they didn't do that in the NFL. During the 1972 Miami Dolphins, they didn't have guys take days off. You played the entire 18-game season, and you did everything you had to do back then. So that's the way I'm going to end this off right now, talking about the undefeated season and why it will not happen again. This is the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. Follow all the content we have on there, and follow your host at Ian Rakelli18, and follow all of the programming we have on here at Sports Angle on PR. I want to give a shout out to Guy Dawson and all of the content that is here on PR Connections Radio, Voices of Humanity, and you want to be a ... and We Got the Power with Brian Gardner. So next week, we have a fantastic episode planned out for you. We're going to have a guest come on the show and talk about the sports world. I have a lot of plans for you in the future. We're also going to have a new intro for the show, and we're going to have the really good intro topics to talk about. So until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rakelli, and have a good one.